Hey everyone, so this video is going to walk us through or begin a discussion of multiplying complex numbers. And so we're going to start by just discussing this concept of I. And so in one of the other videos we talked about I being the representation of the square root of -1. So every time that you see either of these two, so if you see I, you should know that it is the representation of the square root of -1. And if you see the square root of -1, you should know, okay, I can use I to represent that. And so we're going to look at, well, what does I squared equal? So if I is the square root of -1, then I squared is going to be the square root of -1 squared. And so you know that the square root and squaring something are opposites of one another. They're inverses, they cancel out, and it leaves you with -1. Okay, I to the third is going to be I squared, which we know is -1, times I. And so that will give you -I. And then I to the fourth is going to be I to the third, which we know is -I, times I. And so we know that this will give us -I squared. And so if I squared is -1, then -I squared is -1 times -1. So I to the fourth is 1. There's also a circle that is often used. And these represent the coordinate plane. And so I goes here and 1 goes here. And just like if I is positive over here, it is negative over here. If 1 is positive here, it is negative down here. And so here's I squared, I cubed, and I to the fourth. And you see they align. So I squared is -1, which we have here. I to the third is -I, which we have here. And I to the fourth is 1. So you can use either of these representations. Sometimes the circle is a little bit easier to remember. And so now we're going to look at actually multiplying. And so when you multiply, so say I have 5I times 3I. These are both complex numbers. They both have the I there. You're going to multiply just like you did when you had polynomials. So 5 times 3 is 15, and I times I is I squared. The key here when you're simplifying or multiplying is that we need to remember that I squared is -1. And sometimes it's easier to just have it written on the side so you remember. So this is really 15 times -1. And 15 times -1 is -15. Okay? So just the key here is remembering that I squared is -1. Okay, I'm going to try one more where we have -6I and then 4 minus 2I. And so just like when we did polynomials, you distribute. And so I have -6 times 4 is -24, and I have an I. -6 and a -2 is a +12, and I have I squared. And so remember, every time you have I squared, you're going to replace it with -1. So I have -24I plus 12 times -1. And so I have -24I minus 12. And you remember, you always want it in A plus BI form, which means your constant goes first. So you have -12 minus 24I.